direction and ask you a question. What is it about islands that fires up a writer's imagination? The reason I ask this question is I'm thinking of the Irish. They have given us so many great writers. Now, Ireland is an island, and uh, and the best among the Irish stories I found out was inspired by the Aran Islands, lonely islands off the coast of Ireland. So the one example that is coming to my mind is Riders to the Sea by J.M. Singe. In fact, if people can remember, just last year there was an Oscar-winning movie called The Banshees of Inisherin. That was also inspired by the Aran Islands. Sri Lankan authors have produced wonderful books. The example that comes to my mind is Leonard Woolf's The Village in the Jungle. Leonard Woolf was, of course, Virginia Woolf's husband. So I'll come back to my question. What is it about islands and literature?
Well, you're throwing me in the deep end. Thank you, Sampad. First of all, hello, Calcutta. I haven't been here before, and thank you for a wonderful festival. Uh, thank you, Malavika, who's sitting here in the front row. As for islands, do you know, I'm not really sure because I'd like to say islands are inward looking and we agonize, we navel gaze, we're so wrapped up in our own little world. But I'm not 100% sure that's true because you know islands also are prey or are open to lots of other civilizations coming in and out. Sri Lanka being one. I mean, we have Greek crosses in Anuradhapura, which is the Holy of Holies, the Buddhist city, and so on. So we've had, always had lots of other influences, civilizations, cultures coming in. Does that help? I don't know. Or is it the inward
No,
looking thing?
I'm just wondering that, again, if I go back to literature, I think initially islands were always seen as exotic destinations, the site in which something exciting happens. So you think of Treasure Island, you think of Mutiny on the HMS Bounty, you think of Robinson Crusoe. Later, I think literature shifted to recognize the island as a good penal settlement colony. So you had novels like Papillon. And then finally, I think the way literature moved was to consider islands through the eyes of the islanders themselves. They always want to escape the island. I think there is an element of that in your novel too. So, can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I don't know what it's like in India, and I'm sure it's not like this, but Sri Lanka is one of those countries where everybody wants to leave. And always for the wrong reasons. And once they've left, everybody wants to come back. So once a year, we have this huge wave of people who come in who complain bitterly about everything while they're there. Then they go away back again to America or England and long to come back. So it's a strange thing where we go backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards. And perhaps Ireland was the same, actually. People always wanted to leave. Why are we so dissatisfied with ourselves? I'm not really sure of the answer to that.
Perhaps the reason is that Sri Lanka, in that sense, is an outlier. It is a place of many possibilities. It's not any lonely island. Uh, you have India real close. Uh, Sri Lanka has a complex demographic. It has been thrice colonized, I believe. There are two major communities who claim two different ethnicities, who speak two different languages. There are people with different religious affiliations. There are the Buddhists, there are the Catholics like yourself. So, do you think Sri Lanka offers infinite possibilities for people? So, they might go away to avoid a crisis that is unfolding, but they'd like to come back to.
Yes, you're absolutely right. In terms of the complexity of the society, it is easily. I've lived in Europe, in America, in Africa, but Sri Lanka, particularly, is easily the most complex country I have ever lived in. There are so many layers. God help you if you think it's India light, which is very tempting for Westerners to think this is like India, but on a smaller scale. No, it's not. It's completely different, and it is extremely complex. So maybe that also allows people their little niche within the construct of the island. But it also means when you go away, you never find that niche again. You know, you can have Sri Lankans in Canada or Sri Lankans in Paris or Sri Lankans in London, but you don't have that very comfortable niche that you have within the 21 million or 22 million that we have at home.
I think you mentioned during our conversation last night this wonderful example of women who wear flowers in their hair, and they don't realize that it's no longer a custom in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka has moved on, but they are clinging to an idea of Sri Lanka after they have left it, right?
It's absolutely touching, and again, I don't know if it exists in India, but when I go to London and I see Sri Lankans in London, including my own sister, they're so over Sri Lankanized. They it's as if they're clutching to those things that were current when they left. And for a writer, it's extremely risky to write about a place like Sri Lanka, even 2 years after you've left it, because the country keeps changing all the time in minute increments. So you don't even know it's changing. It's when you see the women who appear in my book with their flowers in their hair and their saris from the 1950s and 60s, then you realize, oh my God, we have changed so much since then, but nobody has given us any credit for it. We just know we moved on.
Right. So, Ashok, you were interested to share an excerpt of your book with the audience, I believe. So, I'd like to invite you to read out a passage or two if you wish to.
Sure, sure. Forgive me for reading in the middle of a thing, but in some way, I know many of you may not have read my work, so this might give you a little example. This book, The Unmarriageable Man, the central theme is the relationship between a father and a son, and this is a scene from just after the funeral when the father has died, um, and it gives you a sort of some idea of Sri Lanka. Back home, Myrna opened up the corrugated cardboard boxes lined with newspaper containing the patties, the cutlets, the pancake rolls, and the crowd, mostly unidentified strangers, fell on them. Nothing sharpens the appetite like a good funeral. Though, as funerals went, this one hadn't been that good. No politicians in white sarongs. No lawyers in dandruffed black coats, shiny with grease and rapaciousness. No Boy Scouts. No plump white actress wiping away a practiced tear from a mascaraed eye. My father had not known anyone prominent or rich, hadn't cared to. Indeed, he had considered it the height of vulgarity for people to advertise their qualifications or flaunt their wealth the way they did in modern Sri Lanka, where the rich would tattoo the very dollars to their forehead if they possibly could. I went in and closed the door to my room. Grief must be faced squarely and alone. A man in a walled garden watching the sunset. A thin line of uncertain, wavering brilliance at the top of the mellow brickwork, there for one brief moment, then gone, leaving behind only the blank page of a great unreadable sky. The insignificant noises outside my room faded away, and I sat in silence, and wave after wave of grief washed over me, thin and clear and bright, like breakers on an early morning shore. His absence was so palpable, so tactile, I could reach out all around and touch it. I had hated and despised him for so much of my life. I had spent the last years barely talking to him. There had been no great rapprochement during his last days, as there is in films. He and I had been too busy fighting the bureaucracy of death, barely surviving from day to day, keeping our heads above water to think of any nobler objective. And now he was gone. I could not reach out for the familiar comforts of hate or indifference anymore. All I had was his silence. And then, somewhere in the watches of that sleepless night, it came to me that grief is only the transmutation of love, of the very same chemical composition, liquid, undistilled, the one inevitably turning to the other, like ice to water. It had taken the half completed life and early death of one man for me to discover this. Thank you.
That's excellent. So, while I was listening to you read, and when I myself read the novel, the question that came to my mind was how you, first of all, you and your generation of Oxonians, I think, wield the language with a certain amount of grace and dexterity, which I think my generation of Oxonians do not. Our use of English or any language for that matter is becoming more and more anemic. Your generation's use of language has a vitality, a life force to it. Tell us a little bit about your years at Oxford, and did that help you? Did that equip you with skills, these sort of skills in wielding a language?
Well, I'm not sure you're right, Sampath. I mean, you're giving a lot of credit where credit isn't due.
I'm absolutely not. Believe me, I'm not modest.
First of all, I read pure mathematics at Oxford. So I have to tell you, I didn't read a single book in my years there. Not a single book. I was too busy going to parties and things. But also, my day job was mathematics, which is not about words. It's about points and lines, and it was pure maths. So it's something kind of completely different. It's a different language. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe not reading helps you then. I don't know. Um, and it's very kind of you to say that we have a better use of English than youngsters.
That's absolutely true.
I don't know. I don't know. Maybe language is getting simpler as time goes on, and from the older generation, I think where I'm conscious that my language is more old fashioned than modern day English. But I love it. I love the suppleness of it and the sinuousness. It's something that I love playing with the sounds and putting syllables together. I'm convinced that all language is a form of music, and as is design. I design houses. That's my other day job, but it's all to do with the music, the rhythm, the voids, the solids, the white spaces, the black spaces. So I'm very conscious that language also has those solids and voids in them, the silences and the words.
I mentioned that you're from a certain generation of students at Oxford. You spent 3 years at Oxford in the 80s, right? From 80 to 83.
70s,
Sorry,
older than 76 to 79.
76 to 79. Okay, I stand corrected. Uh, no, the reason I asked you that question was I think certain cultural conditions help nurture a sensitivity to language. And from what I have read and from what I have gathered from people of your generation who went to that place, Oxford was a very different place at that time. It was a place that celebrated complacency, contemplativeness, failure, talent, rather than outcome. So, from a place of glorious complacency, it has now become a meritocrat's paradise. So, I'll give an example to the audience to say what I mean. Uh, I heard this wonderful anecdote about T. Lawrence, on whom Lawrence of Arabia, the movie, was based. An archaeologist, a writer, a diplomat. T. Lawrence took an exam in Oxford. 4 questions were set in his paper. He answered only one, and he got a first class. So brilliant was his answer. But that would not happen in Oxford of today. Even if you have a brilliant student like that, you will be expected to answer 4 questions. Oxford of those days was a place where people would start a DPhil, which means a PhD course. They would drop out and write a book. But the Oxford of now is one where everybody goes to build a career. They want to come back and join the World Bank. They want to join the United Nations. Or if nothing else works out, they want to hold up their degrees and use it to frighten their friends and relatives. So I'm asking you this question again. Talk to us about Oxford in the years you went, and talk to us about England also. What kind of an England was it?
Well, you're absolutely right about Oxford then. Nobody gave a damn because there was a very, very difficult exam to get in. I don't know if it's there now, but I think they got rid of it. It was called the Oxbridge exam. Certainly for the maths exam, it was more difficult than the degree. And I didn't know about T. Lawrence, but I only answered 1.5 questions in my entry exam. I still got in, and so on, you
Exactly,
know.
right.
So I suppose they didn't like, they kind of had you pegged at the start, and they allowed you to run with whatever you wanted to run. I know a friend of mine who was a classic scholar, Latin and Greek. He ended up being an artist, and he left in the middle and went to another college, Ruskin School of Art, actually, to be an artist. So it was much more free, and you didn't have that great sword of Damocles hanging over you saying, I need this to get a job. I need this to get a job. Maybe that was there. But for some reason, we were foolish enough to think it didn't matter. And I'm sort of very conscious that young people today, it is all about the exam. It is all about the result. And it's about getting it before your neighbor gets it. Also, there's such an edge of competitiveness, which we didn't have. It was a gilded city in that sense. Once you got in, you knew you were there, and there was very little they could do to throw you out. So it allowed you freedom to do what you wanted. As for England, once I left Oxford, I was in this very strange time of the 1980s in England. Most of you are way too young to remember it or to know about it, but it was the England of Mrs. Thatcher. And it was a crazy, extraordinary time when great fortunes were being made by young kids simply because they were clever enough to manipulate the stock exchange or whatever, and there was a hell of a lot of money. I'm sad to say that none of it came in my direction, but I ended up working as a laborer on a building site, and but I got hooked on something that a lot of people did, sort of getting old Victorian houses in London, converting them into apartments, into flats. So if it was a two-story little house, you'd make two flats. If it was a three-story, you'd make three flats. And we were knocking these out every 8 weeks. And there was a huge crush because there was so much money. There was a huge crush of people waiting to buy these houses. So it was like a really strange time. And looking back now, I realize how extraordinary it was. At that stage, we had no idea. We didn't really give a damn. We just knew that the money was easy, the money was good. That's all it was. Uh,
You mentioned the Thatcher years, which disrupted the economy and society of the country at the time. There were the Brixton riots, race riots in 1981. A few years down the line, I believe there was the famous miners' strike. So, how was it for you as a brown person, an Asian person in England at the time? And uh, do experiences from that time also feature in this novel?
yes, well, but that's a good question. I ended up by accident in the most violent and the part of London that nobody wanted to go to. If you took a taxi, they stopped at a certain point and say, you walk from here, because they didn't want to take their car and get the car damaged if it went into this. It is an area called Brixton. Now it's really trendy, and my son has digs there and he loves it. But in my day, it wasn't trendy, it was just fearsome. As an Asian, I was like, in a way, more afraid than a white man because the criminal elements knew we were a soft touch, we were easy to get at. But what happened with me was I had this huge hair, like an afro head of hair. So when little old ladies used to cross the road in front of me to avoid me, then I knew I was safe. You know, I would have been more afraid of the little old ladies, frankly, being mugged by them. But it was a strange time. Um, if I may, could I read you just a little
Please
bit
do.
from
Please do. Yes.
it's about a young man. Now, this is not autobiographical, I have to tell you, but of course, you're going to find 101 things in here that are like my own life. The young man ends up in Brixton, and he's trying to find lodgings. And the little corner shop has a Pakistani lady running it who recommends him to a Mr. Brown in this house. Sorry, I'm over here. Just a tiny little bit. I won't bore you too long. So he goes to this house belonging to this Mr. Brown. The bell didn't seem to be working, so I knocked. Nothing. I rattled the letterbox. Then I knocked again. From deep inside, I could hear slow, rhythmic wheeze, getting louder as if somebody was slowly pumping up a bicycle tire. On the other side of the frosted glass, I could make out a blurry black figure. And then the wheezing stopped. He was listening to me, listening to him. Go away, he said through the letterbox. I have enough of you already. There's too many of you here, man. Too many? I exclaimed, stung by this preemptive racist strike. And from a black man in Brixton, too. I only want a room, I shouted back. The lady in the shop said you might have a room for me, Mr. Brown. The wheezing began again. Bilkis? I heard him muttering. Room? He drew back the bolts and opened the door, and the chill struck me. It was like walking into a freezer. What do you want a room for, man? Please, I said desperately. I've just arrived in the country. I need somewhere to stay. He took off the black felt hat he was wearing and began scratching his head very thoroughly for a long time. Then he turned slowly and walked back in. Now, he hadn't invited me in, but hadn't closed the door on me either, so I followed. He stopped at the staircase and leant heavily on the newel post. The wheezing stopped, and I held my breath. Then he began to climb, one step at a time. Step, wheeze, step, step. I followed, falling easily into the rhythm. After about a week, we reached the first landing. He turned and looked at me. I can't manage them stairs, he said. You're telling me, I replied. He threw open the nearest door and said, Your room. It was completely bare, no bed, no curtains, not even a light bulb on the ancient black woven flex dangling sorrowfully from the ceiling. It's great, I said, smiling. How much did you want for it, Mr. Brown? He began scratching his head again. I held on to that bright smile for dear life, not daring to drop it in case he changed his mind. It was painful. Finally, he said, £20 a month. I'll take it, I said quickly. I didn't care that there was no bed. I gave no thought to how I was going to feed myself in a non existent kitchen. And it was an extremely good thing I didn't check out the bathroom. But I had a room in the big city. I was home. Little did I know then that I had just laid my hands on the tail of the dragon, one that was to take me twisting and hurtling through those glorious blue rinsed Thatcher 1980s, breathing fire on everything we looked at, conquering all, scorching all, on what was to be the ride of my life. You can have the whole upstairs, man, Mr. Brown said. I don't come up here no more. It very quiet. He took the first step of his laborious descent down. Then he turned round. If they try to make too much noise, you say, shoo, go away. They frightened a big fellow like you. They frightened. Thank you.
Ashok, have you recorded yourself reading for an audio format?
No, no,
I strongly suggest you do, right?
well, if Penguin is out here listening, maybe they might.
Is
Thank you
Penguin
for
out here?
that. Thank
Okay.
you for that.
Okay. So we'll return to the book. You have used certain literary devices in your book to generate drama. One of this is a visitation from the dead. So without giving away too much in your plot, there is a character who dies, and a loved one of that character then sees a ghost and has several conversations with that dead character. Now, this is part of a long standing literary tradition. Uh, Virgil had Aeneas descend to the underworld to talk to his father, to ask about the future of the Romans. I believe Eliot in the Four Quartets, he encounters a compound ghost of Yeats, Dante, and Virgil. Even in 2023, Jon Fosse, who won the Nobel Prize for Literature, in his monumental work, Septology, there are several conversations and exchanges between the world of the living and the world of the dead. So, did you want to celebrate this long standing literary tradition and see what further possibilities there were in it?
I had this problem. Uh, it's a book. This is a book about a young man and his father. And as with all of us, somebody in your family dies, and you suddenly, only then do you realize there is so much unfinished business. And you think, if only I'd said this, if only I'd done that, if I had been there that day when she asked me to come, but I didn't go, I was too busy, I was going out with my friends. There's so much unfinished finished business in everybody's life at the point when a loved one dies. And I had that. And I thought to myself, writers are very lucky. You can finish business in a book that you can't in real life. But the young man in the book also had unfinished business. And so, very reluctantly, I had to bring his father back to life. so that he could, in some way, achieve some sort of closure in certain areas of their relationship. In real life, as we all know, that doesn't happen. Very sadly, it does not happen. And like a death always knocks you sideways. It's like a bus. Nobody prepares you. Nobody tells you about it till it happens to you. But so this was just a way for me to resolve issues in the book through the characters. Or it was a way for the characters to resolve issues with the ghost. So no, I didn't really think of a long-standing tradition, but I'm relieved that there is one. Because when I did write the book, I thought, gosh, no one's going to read this because it's no longer, it's gone into the realms of surreal, whatever, that there is a ghost. But I mean, I hope the device works okay.
Well, there are several devices that you have employed. I don't know, perhaps not consciously, but which work very well. The other one that comes to my mind is having a character, a man who is in a relationship with a significantly older woman. So the man is the ingenue. And this also has a lot of examples in literature. The one that comes to my mind is this famous book called The Red and the Black, where basically a young man starts an affair with the mayor's wife when he's tutoring the children. I think a lot of people would remember Dustin Hoffman in what was that movie? The Bachelor.
Um,
The,
yeah, I mean, I remember the name of the lady, Mrs. Robinson. What is the name of
yes,
the graduate? The
the
graduate. The
graduate. The
graduate. Yeah,
graduate.
yeah, yeah.
Yes, so this is another tradition too. But in your book, you mentioned that it was a shocking thing to do. I admit this kind of a relationship is unusual, but would it be considered shocking in at that time?
Shocking in the eyes of the rest of Sri Lanka. I mean, I think I was trying to represent the moral majority of an island race where, frankly, anything goes on the island. But if you bring it to the surface and if you go public with it, boy, are you dead in the water. There, so it was shocking to all the ladies who look after him and so on. I don't think, I mean, he wasn't shocked by it, but it was a shocking thing per se, in the sort of the rules of Sri Lankan behavior. It was shocking. Even today, although this takes place 30 years ago, even today, if a young man shacked up with an older woman, they would be virtually ostracized at home.
Even today.
Even today, I think, you
Okay.
know.
So in some respects, Sri Lanka hasn't changed.
No, 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 it hasn't in that respect.
Hmm.
Uh,
So I think this is a good point for me to ask you to tell the audience a little bit about Sri Lankan society, its middle class sensibilities. That's a phrase you've used in your book. But do tell us also about the Sri Lankan elite, the people who migrate out of the country, the reasons for which they migrate. I think somewhere in your book you mentioned that the shocking policy of the 50s and 60s sparked off first a wave of white collar migration, which was later followed up by a wave of blue collar migration. So could you talk to us about that?
yeah, well, we had this very I think it was a well-meaning government, but it was absolutely disastrous. They got rid of English, which was actually the main problem, and they did it for the best of reasons, for the best of motives. They wanted to encourage a sort of nationalism. They wanted people to be proud of being Sri Lankan as opposed to being an ex-colony of England. The really awful part was that nobody realized then that English was the lingua franca of the world. It had nothing to do with it being the colonial master. The fact is, it was something that everybody needed. It also drove this huge wedge between the Sinhalese and the Tamils because everybody felt marginalized. And that's when the emigration began. So you had the burghers. Burghers are, I mean, you got to remember that Sri Lanka has been colonized for almost half a millennium, almost 500 years. So there are a lot of mixed race people in Sri Lanka, and we call them the burghers. Very happily, we lump them all together and call them the burghers. But in fact, that is not so. The society is much more complex, as I said, than that. But they felt completely marginalized when the government said Sri Lanka for the Sinhalese, Sinhala only. That slogan destroyed the island. So you had people like my father who took the first job that came along and went. So many other white collar workers who left, and it actually devalued society in Sri Lanka. And the funny thing is, it's happening again now, again because of the troubles, economic troubles, etc. There's now this sudden unhealthy, unholy rush to get the hell out. And you're left with people like me, the dregs, all the brightest, the young, bright kids all want to go. They just want to leave. They don't care where they go, and they don't mind if they wash other people's lavatories. They won't wash them at home, but they will wash them in Dubai or wherever else they go to. It's incredibly sad.
Hmm. So I wanted to now shift to the process of writing a novel. So, what kind of emotional or psychological experiences do you seek? Because this is not your first book. When you write, uh, so I discovered two schools of thought on this. Evelyn Waugh said that he was not interested in the psychology of his characters or in the or his own psychology while writing. He wrote just for the play of language. Norman Mailer differed from him. Norman Mailer said that I write for the gamut of experiences that I undergo. I enjoy the feverish hothouse atmosphere of writing. So, which school of thought do you subscribe to, or is there a third school we are not aware of?
No, no, I think you're absolutely right. Those two. Interestingly, Evelyn Waugh is one of my all-time favorite writers for his use of language.
Oh,
It's
great.
just unparalleled. If you read Brideshead Revisited or any of his great novels, the use of English is absolutely unparalleled. But you're very right about the fact that the characters are flat, they're shiny pieces that he moves around and makes patterns with. There's no depth to them. But the depth is in the design. It's like modern art. The depth is in the design. There is no depth to Picasso. You know, you see it all there in pieces. It's deconstructed and it's there. It's for you to imagine the depth. You can do that later. So that's one school of thought. The other one is that very tortuous one where you go into the minds of people. I like to think that I alternate between one and the other. So my book Serendipity is very like an Evelyn Waugh book. It's all sharp and brightly colored. There are lots and lots and lots of characters. They're very funny. It's the funniest novel I've ever written or ever will write. But I didn't set out to give it depth. And there's a reason for that, but I won't go into it here. It was written, and I am going into it now. It was written at the end of the war. So when we were all in a desperate state, we didn't think this was a war that anybody could win. People were dying, people were being bombed. And I wrote this novel, which was incredibly funny, but in pieces. So I arranged. So it was, in a way, like expressionist art. I don't know. Anyway, that's one type of novel. The other type is the one where you do go in to the heads of the characters, and it's the characters that are paramount, not not the plot or the words. I don't know. I oscillate between the two, and I guess if you were a good writer, you'd manage to somehow get the best of both worlds. I can't seem to be able to do that. I go from one to the other.
I think you did. Uh, so we'll stay on process for a little while longer. As a writer, as a novelist, how do you conceive a plot? Do you have an end goal in sight, and you feel that you must take the novel to that end goal? Or do you just write about interactions between your characters and let narrative complexity emerge on its own?
No, I'm quite old fashioned in this respect. I think it was Graham Greene, again another favorite writer of mine, who said a book has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Now, when I start, there is always a beginning and there is an end. It's just that I don't know how I will get from Colombo to Candy, if you like. I know I'm going to get to Candy at some point. I just don't know when that'll be or how I will get there. And I think it's very dangerous to plan or plot too much because then you lose the spontaneity of the book. All art is a lot of forethought, a lot of struggle to make it look spontaneous, to make it look as if you just dashed it off one morning. So that plays very nicely into my very lazy sensibilities. So I don't plan too much. I just have a vague idea of where these characters are going to end up. Now, and sometimes I don't even know who all the characters are. There was a book I wrote called The Ceaseless Chatter of Demons, where a character came in halfway through the book, and I sat down to write the next day, and the character reappeared. And finally, when I finished it, I sent it to Meeta Kapoor, my agent in Jaipur, and I said, "I'm very happy to take this character out if you think it's just too much." And she wrote back and said, "Don't be silly. It's the best character in the book." And the character was the devil in that case. It wasn't a ghost, it was actually the devil that turned up in the middle of the book. And the devil had all the funny lines in the book. So I would have been very sorry to cut him out. But he was a very human sort of devil. Anyway, to get back to the original thing, um, I don't like to plan too much, but maybe the mathematician in me wants to have that end. And there's something else that I have that I don't know whether other writers have this. There's a sort of an abstract quality that I want to deal with in a novel. And so I then spend the entire novel hiding that abstraction with, within the novel. So it's like a skeleton that all of us have, but it's hidden by the flesh, the eyes, the ears, everything else, you know? So a writer's job, it seems to me, is to hide that abstraction. But without that abstraction, the book is almost valueless. So in that book, Caesar Shadow of Demons, the abstraction is this question: can you achieve good by committing an evil deed? I won't say anything more, but that's actually at the heart of that book. It's a funny book and it's full of strange characters. Sri Lanka is full of crazy characters, so it's very easy for me to write when I live there.
You mentioned your lazy sensibilities. So I'd like to tell the audience there is nothing lazy about you. You're a builder architect, a personal trainer, an Oxford trained mathematician, and a novelist.
Yeah, but
No,
that
no, no, but let me just come to the question before I lose my train of thought. Sorry. The thing that strikes me here is two of these activities are intellectual labors and two involve significant amount of physical labor. So how do you reconcile the two?
I don't think one has to. I think we're all given a certain number of talents and we use them. A person who says that he can't run 1 mile because he's a mathematician or whatever is wrong. Is plain wrong. I think we all have it in us. You have no
I
idea
am
what.
shrinking in my seat as you say this.
No, but I really do mean it. What you need, Sampath, is 6 months with my training. I'll have you running a
I'll come to
marathon.
Sri Lanka then.
You come to Sri Lanka. That's the deal. That's the deal. But it seems to me such a waste of all our talents if you just concentrate on one thing, because we all have two, three, four things that we can do. We may not do them brilliantly or whatever, but who cares? We need to do them. You know, I really do think that.
That outlook on life is so Gandhian because I don't know if many people know this. So Gandhi believed in intellectual labor, in the need to cultivate one's mind, but he was absolutely against that idea that intellectual labor is the privilege of one class and physical labor is the millstone around the neck of another oppressed class. I'll refer the audience and you both to a brilliant article by this cultural historian. His name is Trideep Suhrut. He mentions this in this article called Thinking with Hands. So, how very Gandhian of you.
Mm. No, no, but it makes perfect sense to me. Why should the moral high ground be taken by the working classes who mix sand and cement? I can mix sand and cement better than they can, and I love it. It gives you muscles where you never had muscles before. Why should it be? And likewise, in the other direction, if you took that working man and taught him the rudiments of language or mathematics, he probably be a better mathematician than either of us. So I think it really does work both ways. I think that people here earlier on were talking about it's not good in education to specialize too early. Spot on. I still don't know at the age of 66 what I want to be in life because I just keep trying different things and you just muddle along, and that's life as far as I'm concerned.
So, I'll jump to my last question and we'll move to the Q&A segment right after that. I'll read a small excerpt to you, and the question that is the addendum to this paragraph is that Ashok, as a novelist, do you think it is increasingly difficult to write about great drama and great tragedy? And I'll read out an excerpt to argue why. So, literary critic says great tragedy has departed with the advance of modern life and its complicated tangle of interests and creature comforts. A highly developed civilization, with its attendant specialization of culture, tends to lose sight of those elemental forces Those primal emotions, naked to wind and sky, which are the stuff from which great drama is wrought by the artist, but which is rapidly departing from us. Do you agree?
No, I don't think so. I think it's still there. It's for us, the writers, and anyone else, the readers, to extract it, extrapolate it. When you think of COVID, great drama appeared. People naked, raw, naked feelings appeared in heads of state, and people were saying things that you wouldn't expect them to say, like "kill them all," let COVID run riot, as the Northern Europeans said. I mean, that's as raw as it gets. They wouldn't have said that Boris Johnson was caught off camera. Or I'm not 100% sure, but there was a lot of raw, naked emotion and grand passions because people were dying, nobody knew why, etc., etc. So I think it's there under the surface. I think we like to think it's no longer there, but I think it's there. I think it's there.
I like your optimism, and I agree actually with you. Yes. So now we'll take some questions from the audience. Please, the gentleman here.
Hi, I'm Aditya Basu. I'm an audiobook publisher and a podcast producer. So,
My
so,
God.
so my question is from pure mathematics calculus, how did the shift actually happen to Shakespeare? And when you were speaking about structures, you said you don't calculate much, but you are a calculator. So, what actually happened, and what's the shift? Is it having any, impact on your writing coming from the mathematics background?
I think I'll answer them in the wrong way, well, or in the right way. First of all, the shift happened in my case when, uh, actually, it's in this last book, The Unmarriagable Man. My father got cancer, and I was the only child, so to speak. I was no longer a child, but I was the only one of his children there in the country. And I had to deal with chemo and radio, and it was just a horrendous time. I remember bringing him back from the cancer hospital after one of the treatments, and he collapsed on the bed. I went into the next room and searched around and found a little exercise book and a stub of a pencil, and I started writing. And that very first short story in the very first book I wrote just came out in, you won't believe it, in half an hour. I had written this story. So it's amazing what the mind can do, when it's under stress. It produces things you never expect. And we've all heard the story about the young mother who lifts a bus to save her child, and I've always not believed that till this happened to me. So, that this really awful time in my life produced the sweetness of a writing career. So there's no accounting for what happens if you just keep your mind open. To get back to the other question about the mathematics in my writing, yes, 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 it is there. I don't like to show it, but every single book has a mathematical um, skeleton, structure, for want of a better word. And here again, my job is to hide that because people will run a mile if they think they're reading a mathematics book, which they're not. They're reading fiction. But inside that fiction, there is mathematics. There are, in my book, The Professional, it's all about space and time. And this thing about, you won't watch this film, Sliding Doors, where what if you went in this direction? What if you went in that direction? And the fact that all of us in this room here, this will never be repeated again, try as we might. It's just not. So anyway, that book is to do with that kind of mathematics. So every book has, to a lesser or greater extent, some maths in it. That's the short answer.
We'll take one more question. Yes.
Good morning. Uh, in my domain, advertising, Dan Wyden, the man who wrote George Just Do It, the most iconic line in advertising ever. So he spoke of how you need to be chaotic in order to be creative. So, since you're a writer, what do you have to say about chaos in writing?
You're absolutely right, or whoever said this is absolutely right. It's to do with over planning. You must not over plan. You need to allow the chaos in, open the door, let the chaos in, because it will form itself into a pattern in front of you, or you will form it into a pattern. But you need to embrace that chaos first. If you plan too much and you say, no, I'm going to do this today, and by Tuesday I will have done that, and by Wednesday I'll have done that, you will probably not get anything. Whereas if you embrace the chaos at the start, you will get something meaningful coming out. I agree totally.
So I think we need to end this session here. Ashok will be available to sign copies of his books and take your questions if you have further questions for him. He is as genial and affable as he is elegant. So, on this note, I'll thank you, Ashok, for patiently answering my questions. Thank you, audience. Thank you, Tata Steel, Malavika, and Team Game Plan.
Thank you all. You've been a great
Good
audience.
afternoon.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Sampad, for a great moderation. Thank you.